On July 20th, 1969, 600 million people watched the Apollo 11 spacecraft land on the moon, an event that became one of the greatest turning points in the United States and world history. The first moon landing greatly expanded technology beyond space exploration and increased nationalism and morale among the American people.
In 1957, the space race began when the USSR launched Sputnik, the first man-made object and artificial satellite in space. The Soviet Union's new technology incorporated a powerful rocket that some believed would be able to deliver warheads overseas to the United States. As a result, fear of the advancing Soviet technology prompted action in America. Many Americans had already seen space as the great next frontier, and this served as a catalyst for space exploration. By the time Sputnik 2 was sent into space, carrying the first living organism out of Earth's atmosphere, the U.S. had already set goals to send a human into orbit.
In 1958, out of hopes to expand the United States space program, President Eisenhower created NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. The Army and the Air Force had attempted to create programs to achieve the goal of sending a human into outer space, but ultimately failed while NASA succeeded. However, NASA faced difficulty in their progress in the first 2 years under Eisenhower, and many questioned the validity of the program. When John F. Kennedy was elected, he assured the public of NASA's importance, as NASA would conduct useful tests and accomplish developments in technology that would benefit American society.
In 1961, plastered all over newspapers, like the Huntsville Times reading, "Man Enters Space," Yuri Gagarin's flight out of the Earth's atmosphere shocked the nation and showed that the United States needed to advance. In regards to Russian success in the space race, Khrushchev stated, "Why were the Soviet people the first in the world to successfully solve such a difficult and truly grandiose problem as sending a rocket to the moon, a problem with many unknowns?" This triumph became possible because these same Soviet people had, with their own hands, their heroic labor in a historically short period, succeeded in solving the supreme social problem. Soon enough, America established their own goals for success in the space race.
On September 16, 1962, President Kennedy set the goal of performing a manned lunar landing by presenting a speech in front of students and members of the space program at Rice University in Houston. He announced his plans for NASA and motivations for space exploration, stating the now famous quote,
"We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too."
The United States had already suffered 2 Cold War defeats, with Yuri Gagarin as the first human to reach space, as well as the Bay of Pigs fiasco. The speech was President Kennedy's demonstration of American technological superiority and international leadership. In order to achieve the goal of putting a man on the moon, by 1964, NASA's budget was increased by almost 500%, along with the direct employment of 34,000 people, and indirectly through industrial and university contractors, NASA reached a workforce of 375,000 people.
The Apollo program took off with Apollo 1 in 1967, which was the first manned mission, but unfortunately, Apollo 1 had design flaws and safety hazards, resulting in a fire and the 3 crew members' deaths. This called for radical changes to the spacecraft, which were tested in unmanned missions. A year later, Apollo 8 was launched and was the first to achieve lunar orbit with 10 successful revolutions around the moon, setting the stage for a moon landing.
Just in time before the end of the decade, on July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 launched into space from Cape Kennedy. The Apollo 11 Saturn V launch vehicle carried astronauts Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Edwin Aldrin, commonly known as Buzz Aldrin, in the command module, and 4 days later, Apollo 11 reached the moon on July 20, 1969.
The Apollo 11 spacecraft consisted of 3 parts: the command module, lunar module, and service module. While Collins orbited in the command module, the Columbia, Armstrong and Aldrin descended to the moon in the lunar module, the Eagle. The journey was not an easy feat. The crew of Apollo 11 set their destination as the Sea of Tranquility, but as they descended to the moon's surface, the crew realized they overshot the landing destination by miles. Instead, they were heading to an area covered with boulders, and with only a minute of fuel left, Armstrong had to maneuver the spacecraft to safety. On July 20th at 4:18 p.m. Eastern Time, with 30 seconds of fuel left, the Eagle landed on the moon.
At 10:56 p.m., with more than 500,000 people watching, Armstrong became the first human on the moon. Aldrin quickly joined Armstrong, and Armstrong planted the American flag on the moon. In the official press conference, Armstrong himself described the moon when he landed with,
"This is the view out the left window. It shows a cratered surface, pockmarked with craters up to 15, 20, 30 feet, and many smaller craters down to a diameter of 1 foot. And of course, the surface was very fine-grained. We could tell that from our view out the window, but there were a surprisingly large number of rocks of all sizes."
The astronauts left a patch honoring the fallen Apollo 1 crew and a plaque that read, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind."
Armstrong and Aldrin spent 21 hours and 36 minutes on the moon, conducting various experiments, collecting samples such as the 3.7 billion-year-old basalts and dark-colored igneous rocks they brought back to Earth, and taking observations. After the astronauts finished taking observations, as the crew of Apollo 11 departed from the moon, the American flag planted on the moon fell down. After 8 days, 3 hours, 18 minutes, 35 seconds, and 953,054 miles, the crew of Apollo 11 landed back home in the Pacific Ocean on July 24, 1969 at 12:50 p.m.
Recovered by the USS Hornet, the crew returned to the mainland to a proud nation. America proved they could compete in the space race. Even President Nixon contacted the crew, recorded in the New York Times article, saying, "Because of what you have done, the heavens have become part of man's world. And as you talk to us from the Sea of Tranquility, it required us to redouble our efforts to bring peace and tranquility to Earth." The huge achievement of the Apollo program cost $25.4 billion and broadened horizons. Apollo 11 not only expanded on America's knowledge, but brought a renewed sense of pride and accomplishment to America and unified the United States.
Apollo 11's moon landing not only lifted the morale of Americans, but it also became a significant part of American culture. Everyone grew curious about the moon and ultimately wanted to have a taste of outer space for themselves.
Romanticism about the moon and outer space emerged. Prior to the landing, many Americans believed the magical connotations of the moon would be destroyed after humans landed on it. However, after the landing, the romanticism was preserved as the American population became attached to the fantastical ideas of outer space. The moon landing established itself in popular culture, prompting endless books, movies, songs, and fashion.
Previous science fiction now seemed childish, and an entire new generation of science fiction authors were inspired to push their imaginations. Although movies about space had existed prior to the moon landing, Apollo 11 further set the foundation for movies such as Star Wars and Apollo 13. In one of their earliest promotion videos, popular television network MTV showed an astronaut planting MTV's flag into the moon, declaring that the music channel had landed. In 1984, when the Video Music Awards began, the Moonman statue was given out as an award. The popular Frank Sinatra tune, "Fly Me to the Moon," was also created in the wake of Apollo 11's success. In the fashion industry, astronauts and space shuttles had become the new trend. Fashion designers were inspired by outer space, thus the Moon Girl look was created. Brands such as Louis Vuitton have reached out to astronauts and incorporated them into their advertisements. Food companies such as Tang, which was sent into space with John Glenn in 1962, and Pillsbury, who promoted space food sticks and freeze-dried astronaut ice cream, aimed their advertisements for those who wanted the moon around the kitchen.
America's fascination with the moon grew, and the success of the Apollo 11 astronauts created inspirational hero figures for young children to look up to, inspiring new hopes and dreams within the American youth. This prompted more manned missions, with increasing time and research on the moon, from just 21 hours with Apollo 11 to 75 hours with Apollo 17.
The period after the Apollo 11 moon landing also included many environmental protection movements, and environmentalism as a whole became more widespread. While the mission had brought a lot of new awareness about outer space, it had also offered a unique perspective on the Earth, as many photographs of the Earth were taken from the moon. The Earth-size photographs showed Earth as a colorful and alive place amidst of the black void of space, and in turn brought awareness and inspired environmental activism. When asked about what the Earth looked like from the moon, Buzz Aldrin stated, "From the distance of the moon, Earth was 4 times the size of a full moon seen from Earth. It was a brilliant jewel in the black velvet sky, yet it was still at a great distance, considering the challenge of the voyage home."
The moon landing inspired the first Earth Day, which took place shortly after Apollo 11 in 1970, along with other changes in environmental policy such as the Clean Air Act. The incredible act of landing on the moon itself inspired many and instilled a social belief in the importance of science and technology, which would begin to become more prevalent in education and schools. As well as this, NASA was pioneering an age of peaceful technology to further society and had inspired a kind of hope and potential for humanity to some. The moon landing turned dreams into reality, and to many, things seemed possible that had not before.
One of the most integral parts of the Apollo program was technology. Daniel Lockney, an editor for NASA, said, "There were remarkable discoveries in civil, electrical, aeronautical, and engineering science, as well as rocketry and the development of core technologies that really pushed technology into the industry it is today." After Yuri Gagarin's success, Khrushchev stated, "It was perhaps one of the greatest engineering and scientific feats of all time. It was huge. The engineering required to leave Earth and move to another heavenly body required the development of new technologies that before had not even been thought of. It has yet to be rivaled."
In addition, in a National Geographic quote following the landing, "It involves so complex a technology that no one man can begin to comprehend what lies behind it. The tons of blueprints, the 20,000 contractors, the 20 million pages of manuals, instructions, and other material printed monthly by the Kennedy Space Center alone, the rocket and spacecraft encompassing more than 5 million separate parts, the engines, the most powerful in the world, that gulp 15 tons of kerosene and liquid oxygen in a second and get 5 inches to the gallon, the telemetry that during launch sends back to Houston each second enough information to fill an encyclopedia volume."
The success of the mission of sending a man on the moon relied on high-tech equipment, very precise calculations, and broad-range communication devices and systems. The technology NASA developed was beyond anything that had been created before, and acted as a pioneer in many fields of technology. The research that went into the Apollo missions and the technology produced by the missions directly led to the fast-paced advancement of technology in America. Technology developed by NASA scientists regularly make it into products developed in robotics, computer hardware and software, aeronautics, transportation, and health facilities. Supercomputers, microcomputers, and software were created by the same technology developed by NASA. Without this technology, laptops would have been created much later, and companies like Intel Corporation would not exist.
Many scientists and engineers worked on all aspects of the Apollo missions. In the early years of NASA, researchers worked in the Jet Propulsion Lab in California, creating satellites and rockets, specifically the Ranger satellite probe that would take close-up pictures of the moon's surface to gather information and then transmit the information back to Earth. The JPL was also responsible for tracking, communication, and data management, which would all be crucial. The ability to launch manned and unmanned loads in and out of Earth's orbit required a lot of power, resulting in the creation of powerful rockets with the help of engineers, military personnel, and constant improvements and tests.
The Apollo 11 shuttle was launched with the Saturn V rocket, which was 6.2 million pounds and taller than the Statue of Liberty. The computer technologies used for the Apollo missions were often overlooked, but were essential for the process. The Saturn V, Command Module, and Lunar Module all had computers with different software, some for guides and navigation corrections, data transmitters, and ways to correct failures. The Lunar Module was the spacecraft the astronauts took into space and used to land on the Moon. It had a completely new design from the previous missions and was built to withstand the vacuum of space, as well as other additions to the spacecraft. The ability to take photographs of the lunar surface in the vacuum of space and to be able to transmit them back to Earth was an impressive technological advancement as well.
The most significant thing about the technology in the Apollo program was not the tech developed for the mission, but what it could lead to. Many of the innovations created in the space program would go on to be altered and used for everyday purposes, medical uses, engineering, and many others as well. The materials created for the crew's uniforms were very innovative, such as the shock-absorbing and stabilizing material for the shoes, which have influenced athletic shoe design today.
Various technology from NASA was used to develop new medical technology like implantable pacemakers, which are programmable as well, meaning there is not a need for more invasive surgery. On the other Apollo spacecrafts, there existed a thin layer of aluminum over mylar to protect the equipment and crew, which can now be used for insulation on commercial products, homes, even food, and is used to help medical patients in the extreme cold.
The author Gene Cernan once wrote, "Sometimes it seems that Apollo came before its time. President Kennedy reached far into the 21st century, grabbed a decade of time, and slipped it neatly into the 1960s and 1970s.
The success of Apollo 11 was fueled by human ingenuity and marked the moment humanity experienced what it would be like to interact with other planets.
This remarkable moment in American history will never be forgotten, as it has implanted itself within the culture and technology we are familiar with today.